Namaste, welcome, Shalom Alaikum, Shalom. Hi, I'm Mathura Das, and welcome to my 26th live stream share. Um, I'm broadcasting, this is coming from the southwest of England, and hi, I am Gee. Um, I've been doing this for weeks now, I've kind of been. I do some Om chanting because it's a very universal spiritual sound vibration that everyone can tap into, and I love it personally. And my mother, my dear mother, and then I do some prayers to my teachers, my lineage, and then I do a chant and a song, and then I'm going to continue a kind of this story, at least talking about aspects related to the story, because is that okay, Bruce? Is the sound all right? Let me just check. Hold on a minute. Sound should be fine. Sorry, it's up as it's. I'll get this a bit closer. Okay. Hi. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Thanks for. Does that tell? Is it sounding better, everyone? Um, yeah, I'm going to do some oms now, and good. Okay. So it's weird the technology, especially with the doing these live shares. It's different if you do it offline and then do it. But anyway, it sounds. I'm sure it will. Hopefully, it will settle. Um, yes, I will. The story is massive. Goes over hundreds of years, involving historical processes, my involvement in things, how got the name Natura Das, got involved with the Krishna movement in the 70s, and I've been explaining in my previous shares where I went in all of that story. And in the very last share was the kind of the final one, really, of that story was when I actually handed in my resignation to the kind of the Krishna movement and decided that I had to leave it for various reasons. I'm going to come back to that after the songs and music and recap, talk, and reflect, and have some talks about all the things I've talked about. Hare Om, Hare Om, Hare Om. And oh yeah, I always do this. I get mixed up. Oms first. Okay. Om is actually three syllables. A, U, um. So it's Om. And the whole idea is to kind of not hang on too long on the A or the U, but on the vibrational one on the mm. Said like bon in French. So according to people who know more about these things than I do. Oh. Timirandasya Jananjana Salakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swabhavantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Adakamala Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Sahaguna Raghunatham Yutam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Harijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu He Nabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Shri Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shanyavadi Paskyacha Deshatarine. Hi, welcome to everybody who's just been tuning in. I'm Mathura Das. It's my 36th live stream. Not 36, 26, sorry. Been doing this since Easter. Been covering lots of ground with the story. I always do a little chant and a song or something to just kind of start off the session. And so we've got to change the key for a start. I hope everyone's feeling okay today. Things change in the world and in our lives on a daily basis, don't they? You may have noticed from some of my friends that yesterday I went on a bit of a photo binge. So I've been kind of, wow, it's like my whole life has been passing before my eyes yesterday. I mean, I had lots of stuff in storage, but hadn't looked at them for a while. And they all are from different parts of my life. And afterwards, I've done the chant. I'm going to sing the song in O India because I put some pictures of Ranjit Nath. So now people, if they've seen that, they'll go, oh, that's Ranjit Nath. Okay, that's what he looks like. I'm feeling Shiva coming on, you know. I didn't really know what I was going to do today, to be quite honest. I'm going to do Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole, Namah Shivaya. And then other kind of praises of Shiva, Gangadarai, he who has the Ganga coming from his hair, Umeshwarai, who has his partner, his Shakti is Uma, Jatadarai, who has dreadlocks, Jatas, and Someshwarai has the moon in his hair. And yes, a few little names like that. So please join in. It's kind of call and response. That's what we do in these kind of chants. Normally there would be all sorts of percussionists and chorus people here, but here I am. And anyway, it's lovely and a big honour to be able to share with everybody because I feel to be connected with everybody on a regular basis. It's fantastic, and I know I've got feedback from people, and they say that it's like I'm just in the living room or something. And even though, and you do, and it feels like somehow or other we're all in this big, massive living room together. So great, maybe around a cozy fire. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Ganga Darai Shiva Ganga Darai, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Ganga Darai Shiva Ganga Darai, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Someshwarai Shiva Someshwarai, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Someshwarai Shiva Someshwarai, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Jatadarai Shiva Jatadarai, Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Jatadarai Shiva Jatadarai, Hare Hare Boli, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Umeshwarai Shiva Umeshwarai, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Umeshwarai Shiva Umeshwarai, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Vishveshwarai Shiva Vishveshwarai, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Vishveshwarai Shiva Vishveshwarai, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Ganga Dharai Shiva Ganga Dharai, Hara Hara Bole, Namah Shivaya. Ganga Dharai Shiva Ganga Dharai, Hara Hara Bole, Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Hare Hare Bole, Namah Shivaya. Hare Hare Mahadev. Welcome again. Well, while we're sitting here in England and thinking we're tropical, in Vrindavan today it was something like 146 degrees centigrade, 117 or 18 Fahrenheit. My God, my goodness gracious me. And I'm sure Abdul in Lahore, it's pretty hot over there. My goodness. I hope everybody's feeling okay. I'm going to sing. I haven't sung it for a bit. I'm going to sing "Oh India" because after seeing the pictures of Ranjit Nath yesterday that I posted, I haven't seen pictures of him. Um, I have talked about him a little bit before, but he's mentioned in a couple of our songs, and the reason is because he was one of the most far out, interesting people I've ever met in my life. An enigma, basically, a kind of Merlin type character, with all of those things connected with it, and mystical, and with siddhis, some occult powers. I just even found one picture of him sitting with um, Dharmadas, one of the big mahants from Ayodhya, Sitaram Babas, and he was a sadhu. And he's a married man, Ranjit Nath, and a kind of a Gori, a tantric. He called himself a para yogi because he dealt with higher energies. But anyway, he appears in this song. And the song was written by me and Prana for the Bindu Babas, and it's almost like kind of our theme song. And for everybody who has a soft spot in there for India, we have a nice chorus that you can join in with. Um, Oh India, you'll always be my love affair. There's never been a jewel so rare. There's no one like you anywhere. Or I think would make a lovely pair. And there you go. That you can join in. Please join in. And I do some funny noises with my. Got to get comfortable. Get the guitar right. That's it. That's better. That's much better. Okay, yeah, there we go. Oh India, I do funny noises. Yeah, sound a bit like chickens, but it's meant to be trumpets. Sorry. Gather round and hear my story, tales intriguing from afar, how I lost my heart completely in the land called India. On the sweet breeze I went sailing to this land of ancient kings, spun the wheel to seek my fortune, for who knows what tomorrow brings. Camels and cows and rickshaws everywhere, and bright-eyed girls with flowers in their hair, cooking on the corner their chapatis and rice. Pay the dahiwala for a lassi and ice. Porter took my bags up to the hotel room. Baba said he'd see me in the afternoon. When Baba came to see me with his pan-stained teeth, he said, "It's your lucky day. We've got some Mazari Sharif." Oh, India, you'll always be my love affair. There's never been a jewel so rare. There's no one like you anywhere. Oh, India, yes, you're the only one for me. I'm as high as I could ever be, and only 50 quid a key. In the wilds of West Bengal, I met a psychic Sikh called Singh. With just one look and in an instant, he could tell me everything. Something big was gonna happen after I turned 43. Universal mystic forces would reveal my destiny. took a desi sleeper down to Varanasi. Smoked a wicked chill and drinking spicy chai tea, sitting by the Ganges after taking my bath. And when I looked around, there was this Ranjit man, a barber dressed in black and all covered in ash, hidden naughty guys and garlanded with Shiva Rudraksh. I was taken by surprise, I didn't know what to do. He said, "Welcome, my friend. I've been expecting you." Oh, India, you'll always be my love affair. There's never been a Jew so rare. I think we'd make a lovely pair. Oh, India, yes, you're the only one for me. Sat on this mud under this banyan tree, as happy as can be. Yes. Went back to this fellow's journey, where we sat for quite a while. Revealed his deepest secrets to me, passed down through the hands of time. He seemed to touch something inside me, a wave of light engulfed my soul. I took a transcendental journey, the greatest story yet untold. Kundalini rising like my spine was on fire, sucked into a vortex passing through my third eye. Chakras started spinning, they all started to ring. Then I watched the heavens open and I saw everything, past, present and future all rolled into one. Endless lives and visions, all that I've ever done. God handed me the script, and as I turned the first page, I was looking at the dawning of a new golden age. Oh, India, you'll always be my love affair. There's never been a jewel so rare. There's no one like you anywhere. Oh, India, yes, you're the only one for me. I wonder what me next door neighbours would say if I took you home for the month for tea. Bharat Mata ki jai ho. My goodness, really, India needs a lot of blessings at the moment with everything that's going on there. My goodness, the virus thing is going a bit crazy. There's so many people. The population in India is just so beyond us, our comprehension. And the people who are living with the basic needs in India, the percentage is just like, oh, and there's so many people going through it at the moment. And now in Bengal and Bangladesh, they've just had the massive cyclone. So I can only just hope and pray that somehow or other, whatever they get going through is eased somehow or other, and the suffering is mitigated some way or another. I can't really, not much you can say really. Um, well, hello and welcome everybody. Back to me, Maturadas, and my story. It's again, as I have to keep reiterating all the time, it's great, fantastic opportunity for me to be able to kind of like blabber on and talk about things. As you know, I've got lots of things to blabber on about. And the story part that I've been explaining, for that, just to recap, basically, it's a story involving two historical processes, one from ancient India and one that comes in contemporary times in the 40s from Europe via an accident in a laboratory, which was the creation of LSD. So in my specific life, about how I became Maturadas, there were these two I've been exploring in my shares over this talk, how that came down through the ages, thousands of years ago, through historical processes on the spiritual level, and then there's a modern historical uh, um, part of the story, which is about how the West and the East came closer together. So there's this historical ripple coming from ancient times in India. And then there's this psychedelic ripple, and then there's this Hare Krishna. Then there's this the East West, how the East and West became closer, really. Um, by looking and expressing my story, I've hoped to shed light on not that this is a new discovery or something, but for putting it in a picture where people can understand who've been involved in various spiritual processes, not just the Krishna thing, but it could be any of the Eastern teachings that became prevalent over a period of time. And I've explained the timeline about how that came about and what were the processes. And so before the even spiritual teachings came, there had to be a few kind of like just historical things that went on. And I've explained that that was about the colonialization of the world by the European powers, and how England's rise to power, all of the powers really kind of coming to India, trying to the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, and the English, but it was the British that kind of got the upper hand in the end, and they were kind of winning the power battle in Europe as well. And so what that led to is the British getting based in Calcutta, developing their power hold in India, and a class of Indians being educated during that period, in basically in the Victorian period, in the late Victorian period. And through that process, certain characters involved that shaped Indian history and world history, and spirituality that brought East and West together. And I've talked about many of the characters, but specifically I focused on Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was originally called Kedarnath Dutt, born in 1838 in, I think, Birnagar, not far from Calcutta, and then got educated 20 years later and became a magistrate under the British, and was the first person to have a kind of a vision that this teachings of Bengali Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, or Chaitanyite Vaishnavism from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who appeared in Bengal in 1486. He discovered this after, even in Bengal, after the kind of teachings had kind of almost over a couple of hundred years become a bit obscure, and he reapproached these teachings with a kind of different mind than most of the other kind of Vaishnavas of his day. Not all, but he was prominent and had an idea that this would have a kind of, which has a relevance for the whole world. And it was due to his vision and his son, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who took up the mantle after his father passed in 1914. And he took it forward and created an organization called the Gaudiya Mutt. And then in 1920, Abhay Charan Day met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he later became known as A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And so there's a line from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to Srila Prabhupada. And eventually, Bhaktivedanta Swami made it to the West under the instructions of his guru in 1965 and founded the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in New York in 1966. And from that, a process started quite rapidly, and that all happened to coincide in the West with the rise of hippies, the counterculture, psychedelic drugs, and a general kind of dissatisfaction amongst young people with the way of the Western world, questioning people's minds being open to all sorts of things, and also the whole process of dropping out and living radically different lifestyles. And this all coincided with the timing of when Bhaktivedanta Swami was starting the Krishna movement in New York, and especially it really, I covered it quite extensively, the timing of his arrival in San Francisco with the flowering of what became known as historically the Summer of Love in 1967, the summer, but this was even at the beginning when a big happening had happened. And this was all coinciding with the buzz of what was happening in society at that time. Meanwhile, I'm over in England. I'm about 10 years younger than that. It was going to take me a few years to grow up and for this thing to spread and spread. And I'd be getting the effects of what was happening with this whole social revolution, but mostly through Top of the Pops and then later through different musical programs and the influence of my elder brother, Nick, who was very much ahead of all the time. And this all led to the appearance in our world of psychedelics and these things that people would, the hippies were taking, and something was happening to them. And that's what happened to me. And I've explained that in my share. I went through a whole kind of journey, became transformed from not being very interested in anything spiritual because I came from a secular modern family that were kind of atheist agnostic. And it was through this path of psychedelics that I got involved with spirituality very rapidly, in my 15th and 16 years, in 1972 and 1973. And then this all culminated with meeting Krishna devotees at a big hippie festival involving when I was on psychedelics. And I went through a kind of death rebirth experience, and which led to me making a decision not to go to college and pursue that road in life. And I took the other road. And this is all just before my 17th birthday, and went off to Amsterdam, lived in a community there in Amsterdam, and I've described that and how that changed. And one of the essential things that I've been explaining in this story is explaining this story and how things and why things happen. There are all these timelines, quite crucial timelines, because things keep morphing and changing all the time. And I think that's kind of going to be some of the theme of what I'm going to talk about today, because that story of mine, I'll just take that to my story for people who haven't seen the whole thing. It goes through a whole process where eventually Bhaktivedanta Swami passes away in 1977, in November the 14th, where I happened to be there. And then at a big festival in 1970, just a few months later, at the international headquarters in Mayapur in West Bengal of the Krishna movement, a big decision was made, momentous decision by the Krishna leaders of the movement, and they created this role for themselves to be gurus. And this had a massive, drastic effect on about how the Krishna organization, this institution that Bhaktivedanta Swami had set up, was going to go and affect all the lives of the people who'd been involved in that process up to then in a great big way. It could have gone a very, very different way, but it didn't. It went the way it went. And so that's what I've been telling the story about so far, and how that kind of, with me, it became a kind of almost a series of confrontations because I became involved quite young. And as I was growing and maturing, my whole personality was maturing. I developed a certain perception about the way things were, and always had a strong sense of my own individuality. And then when things in the institution started to get a bit funny, off skew in terms of what I thought the organisation that I'd signed up to be part of was going in a direction. That's when I decided that I had to leave. I could not do it. I had to take the risk of moving outside of this protective, kind of protective environment. It wasn't feeling very protective anymore. Um, this is going to be, so this is where I got to the story, and in my last share, and it was about kind of this. I was left with kind of these options. It was a bit very similar to my thing at grammar school. The headmaster there said, if you don't do this and you don't do this and you don't do that, don't come to school tomorrow. And I wasn't going to do those things, so I didn't go to school tomorrow. So he didn't actually throw me out, but they, so it's the same thing with the I was left with these, you've got to be like this, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that. But really, they knew that I couldn't be like that. And so basically, they were just making it difficult. So I actually had to leave. And this is kind of, okay, I've told my story, and everyone's got their own different story. Mine was, fortunately, not too traumatic, my departure from the Krishna movement. But so that was a long time ago. That was 1980. Now we've crossed it. This is like 40 years ago. It's a long time. Many, many things have happened since then. I didn't look the same. That's one thing for sure. I've been shocking a few people with all these photographs I've been showing. Kind of like, yes, I actually was quite thin and young once, so you could see through the photographs. And I did this at this period, and I did that at period. And when you get to kind of the 63, you have lots of chapters in your life full of different kinds of experiences. So all this story that I've explained so far, this was literally just up to my 23rd year. That's like 40 years ago. And so many things have happened since then. And so um, I'm going to kind of, I suppose, well, what happened was with me, I'll tell you what actually happened with me, because I gave a few clues in the last share. Is I actually, a few weeks after that encounter, which was around April, I ended up going back to London. And at the beginning, I just went to stay with my mother because I didn't know exactly where I was going to stay. But I went straight up to the temple, to the restaurant, which was called Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. It wasn't called Govinda's that time, and it was at this temple they'd just had for a couple of years at Soho Street. They'd moved from Berry Place in Bloomsbury to Soho Street, and they had this restaurant. And I immediately got a job to work there, and um, there was a house in Finchley where a kind of a life member who was from Mauritius, he owned it, and I think he was renting it to ISKCON or allowing us devotees to stay there for certain reasons, and all the people that were involved with the restaurant were living there, and there was Narahari and his wife Gokularani, and I think their two children. Can't remember their names. I'm sorry about that. Lovely. And there was Bidan Chandra and Ugrasena, who I'd known for years. She was from America, New York, and been to Woodstock even. And Bidan Chandra was a very early Krishna devotee from Amsterdam, and went off to America and happened to have been in New Vrindavan when it was attacked by a motorcycle gang. And he actually saved the deities and got shot. And eventually, apparently, he died from later in America from results of things connected to the bullet wounds that he had. Anyway, so Bidan Chandra was there and his partner, wife Ugrasena, and Arundhati came for a little bit, Pradyumna's wife. They weren't partners at that time. Um, so there was there, and I can't even remember everybody else. But we were all kind of like sitting in the living room, and they'd already been, doing what they'd been doing. But for me, I've been doing all my story um, in India, and now I've just had this kind of experience, and we're all sitting there, and it's suddenly we've entered into this really big. I've entered into this new chapter with it all. I think if you were a married person with kids and family, kind of like if you were to leave the ISKCON organization, it wasn't so drastic as for somebody who was a single kind of brahmachari thing, because in those days, kind of ISKCON was, you were either kind of in or out. When I mean in this institution. It all depends where you were, what that institution was. We had centres and towns, and then we had these kind of community buildings and chateaus and things. And according to where you lived, affected the way that you felt secure or comfortable in the community. And this last year of my, if you've seen, I've been explaining that journey. I didn't really have I was kind of staying in Bombay, but I was traveling, and I didn't have a fixed abode. I didn't have a place where I felt was really, really home. And now I was suddenly there in England, and I was in this, it was just this kind of, I explained it, the hypnotic bubble had just burst. I'd kind of entered into that in around, late summer, October 1973. I'd kind of voluntarily entered into that. I wanted to be in a very kind of focused spiritual lifestyle. Um, and I became completely absorbed in the organization, what it was doing, my role within it, playing my part. And I've described this whole kind of like this journey of discovery I went through, going through that process. But then now I've gone through from 1973 to 1980, and there I'm sitting with the other devotees. And I remember we kind of like all kind of like sitting there, kind of everyone was wondering really where it was all going now, because when you're, I mean, right at the beginning of that experience within the, in the I couldn't even imagine a kind of a lifestyle or a future that was outside of this thing, this Hare Krishna organization that I'd become part of. And what was interesting was that was going to happen. Okay, before maybe going into that, I maybe should, you know, have some of the ideas that I've been kind of, they weren't kind of automatically obvious when I was sitting, when we were sitting around there. We didn't give a kind of an in-depth analysis of where we'd just been or with our journey. It was more like lots of us were like, phew, wow, that was, we all could not live like we had, it used to be. Things had changed. Things ain't what they used to be. They just weren't the same as they were. Many, many things had changed. And for most of us, the biggest change was this whole kind of shift after Prabhupada leaving, and then the leaders and the gurus that going into this extreme power mode, and the orientation of the Krishna movement suddenly came towards, it became towards kind of promoting these different personalities, and believing in this whole package that was there, and all the little back to Godheads. There was, this advert, meet a genuine spiritual master, and the genuine spiritual masters didn't always last that long. And all of the writing on the wall that I had kind of seen or had been aware of while I was in those months before kind of fading out in end of 79, 1980, came to pass, and in some ways far more dramatic and extreme, than I even imagined it would be, because nobody really understood what had happened by being in that group. Was a lot of us, and most probably including me to an extent, and at least at certain periods, we'd actually kind of swallowed our own hype. We'd become, um, these other, most of these traditional Vaishnavas that I had met, they were very humble and stuff, and a lot of devotees. I've got a lot of the rank and file devotees were quite humble, but there was an attitude that I have to say, a lot of it came from a kind of Bolshevik American attitude. It wasn't so much in Europe, but it was this real kind of, this is where the cult dynamic thing becomes dangerous, where everybody starts feeling they're ultra special. And then, because we've got a guru who we believe in as a great spiritual teacher, we start to, people start to feel kind of special, very, very special. And that can warp the mind if it goes in a funny way, because then it can make you feel superior. And then there can be this whole thing that happens with cults, the us and the them scenario, where people start to look down on everybody else. And I noticed that and a lot of people who've come across Krishna devotees, generally, some people are really put off by this kind of really kind of like Bolshevik arrogance that many devotees have. And it's not just a kind of, me reacting against, authority figures. Dr. Thomas Hopkins, in a really interesting article, he was a spiritual, I think, professor of spirituality and Eastern teachings in America, and was one of the early professors in America to connect right from the Tompkins Park kirtans in the early days in '66. And he visited the temple, met Prabhupada, knew the devotees, followed the whole history. And him and his wife came as well. And he mentions in this article that ISKCON published in the manner. It's quite a good article, I have to say. It's really interesting. He said that there was this kind of, he used the term, I can't remember, it made sense more to Americans. It was about some kind of characters in America who had a swagger. He said they had a swagger. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think that what it kind of there was a kind of this mood amongst devotees, and especially people. I noticed people who were involved with book distribution. Or to a fanatical degree, you know, and I had actually to say I had a bit of a clash with Buddy Munter in Amsterdam about this. And Buddy Munter was a very respected person and great devotee. He did lots of wonderful things, but there was this kind of mentality that I just wasn't, you know, it was this thing like how much in that little world of the Hare Krishna organization to prove one's worth and show who you were and have an identity. There were different ways to do it. And for many people, it became a whole kind of like how many books you could sell, and suddenly, and how much money you could collect, suddenly became a mark of your spiritual acumen. And so, and I had a problem with that, and I mentioned that to Buddy Mantra, and he almost kind of blew his top, really, when I came up with it. It was almost for him heresy, that kind of way of thinking. And I was just, and I kind of knew that that was his way of thinking because that's the way he was. And you know, and I just kind of, I just thought, is this, you know, this mindset, you know, even at that time, is this all what is that what Prabhupada came to the West to teach? You know, did he want thousands and thousands of followers that were all just kind of out there, militant book distributors, you know, with a kind of arrogant swagger? I, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that many of the things that Prabhupada utilized for spreading Krishna consciousness were um, literally to plant the seeds to set something in motion that he ultimately knew he was not in control of. And I have, and, you know, this is something that I have to accept about certain things that have developed in history that I personally might not agree with, but they just have a life of their own. You know, Prabhupada set this whole ball rolling, and it went through different stages in its development. And this stage at this period, when I'm just moving out, the Krishna movement was going through its guru teething situation at that time, which was affecting the kind of apostasy of Prabhupada disciples all over the world on quite a massive level. So, but then you see what happens is with new regimes. See, it's it's not just, you know, the Hare Krishna phenomena. This is what actually does happen in new regimes. When a regime is like the old order, the new order, and when the new order comes, and they're trying to establish whatever it is that they think is the way forward, um, people from who represent the old order or who are not kind of like willing to play the game, they become a kind of obstacle for the people who are trying to establish their regime. And that's kind of, well, it's not even a conspiracy theory. We know that that was almost a strategic plan that many of the leaders had at that time because that's what they wanted. They wanted to have pliable yes men. I'm not going to use the word psychopaths, but I've said it now. But um, but they want people who are yes men, people who are going to kind of do what they're bidding, and because now they are the leaders, you see, and because of the hierarchical nature of how ISKCON was structured, these kind of things, and I'm going to use the word now, inevitable. I've used it before in my talk earlier, and so I think, you know, when I one of the first things I felt when I started to look at the history of why things were the way they are, why they became how they were, you really do have to trace um, the roots of the ISKCON thing to the package and the whole setup that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati set up with the Gaudiya Math. Because if you trace this line from Bhaktivinoda Thakur to Bhaktisiddhanta to Prabhupada, this is taking a tradition from a certain place in society in Bengal, then it's going out of India, it's kind of reaching out through literature to the West, you know, but on a massive level, it's going through these stages. And through these stages, certain things are going to get kind of, you could say, I don't know if the word lost in translation, but the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati at a specific time and place, you know, and I've explained that idiom, set up an organization for a specific purpose, knowing himself that this is a kind of almost, I'm not sure what the word is to describe that. Um, um, the process of religions, and there's a big essay, famous essay, was where he condemns religions and actually accuses them of some of the perpetuating some of the worst atrocities ever perpetuated on the planet. But and you know, and what are religions? They're spiritual teachings started by a charismatic avatar or a guru or a teacher prophet, and then it follows through his disciples and their followers, and then it goes through time and it becomes established and it grows and it becomes this thing, what we call, you know, it starts off as a small sect or a cult, and then it becomes a religion. And what Prabhupada, being coming, being born a Gaudiya Vaishnava, but adopting, becoming a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and being adopting the vision of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and the vision to promote and spread the you know, Vaishnavism internationally. But I'm talking about the kind of the, you know, the basically the whole thing that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati introduced with saffron robes, mutts and monasteries, and setting up a specific hierarchical structure, which is kind of common for India as well, not just the West. If you know, because I've been to Kumbh Mela and I've gone quite deeply. Some of the pictures I shared, you know, I was connected with a Baba who was connected with the Nimbaka Sampradaya, and I discovered this whole organization within the Kumbh Mela framework called Char Sampradaya, based on the four Vaishnava Sampradayas. And it's a kind of, it's how they run their organization. You know, they get together, and there's been these traditions that have been going on for centuries, and they've been going down, and they're all going through their journey, progressing in time as well. They've got their story, they've got their specific cultural traits that have been going through. And we and Bhaktisiddhanta kind of created a kind of maverick sampradaya break off from all of that to go internationally, and because the lineage isn't a guru diksha parampara. It's based on kind of accepting the major spiritual teachers of the time who are empowered, and this has caused a lot of controversies over the years, and complications. But okay, I'm going to get into that in a bit later. But this is kind of this. A lot of the things that were inherent and in the kind of package that Bhaktisiddhanta had, and his way of envisioning how that would spread. But Prabhupada, being a disciple and a humble disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, wanted to kind of like just take what his guru had given and kind of pass it on, but adapt it for the Western people. But in that process, you know, the whole Krishna movement going through time, it went through a whole process of expansion, and it got to, you know, the levels of the matrix of the whole thing that Prabhupada set in motion got complicated and more complicated, and the hierarchical structure that Prabhupada established, putting the GBC up here and this and that. It was, you know, he was following the package that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had wanted, but the Gaudiya Math could not stay together as a cohesive organization. It splintered because it was kind of inevitable. It's very, very hard at a certain time in people's development to kind of they maybe lose a bit of their innocence, and you know, and they and maybe also there's another thing to say for this fragmentation process as well, you see, because everything has a reason and a purpose. Now, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had a vision to create a movement that would be cohesive, but by the very nature of it, it had its natural tendency was to splinter off. And what actually happened in that process was, even though the Gaudiya Math became a kind of didn't have the vision, didn't have the impetus that it had when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was there, it still served a purpose, because all of Prabhupada's godbrothers, they created these little separate mutts, and they hadn't taken on the same kind of vision that Prabhupada had taken from Bhaktisiddhanta, all the same instructions. But they kind of flourished in their own way, in their own small circles. The different Gaudiya Mats had their small centres. They were maybe big, the actual centres. They maybe just took over some of the buildings that had been there before, and or they started them off themselves, and they had their followers, and they had their rituals, and they had their temples in Vrindavan and Navadweep and in different parts of India, and maybe that was all, that's also part of the picture. It's and the Gaudiya Math, I saw like we had ISKCON had a big celebration in Calcutta, celebrating um, the timeline of Srila Prabhupada's life. The Gaudiya Math had one, and I saw the video, and you couldn't really tell the difference between ISKCON and the Gaudiya Math. There was many of them at this big program in Calcutta. They're still flourishing themselves. They still got their mutts. ISKCON just happened to be one of the branches that went out and became bigger and bigger and bigger. And this word inevitable that I brought up at the beginning, is going to kind of carry through into the ISKCON story, because just as inevitably the Gaudiya Math had to split up, but it just could not stay cohesive for whatever reasons. Prabhupada had that fear because he'd seen the whole thing. He's seen the whole thing, and he's discussed it many times with the disciples, who was what, why this happened and why that happened. And he was a grihasta, living outside of the main power struggles. So he avoided all of that. And he wanted to do something different, try and achieve something different. And well, he did. He did. But still, it obviously carried many of the similarities and the inevitabilities of the same problems that were inherent in the Gaudiya Math. And one of the things that I personally feel, this is my personal feeling, is the okay. And maybe it's like, if you read this, maybe I should next time, might even read it out, the letter from Pradyumna. It's very important. Pradyumna wrote this very, very intelligent letter to the GBC just in August of 1978, after they became gurus, especially after seeing what was going on. They actually had to sit, they were very cynical like me right from the beginning, but when they actually saw how they were interpreting their roles as gurus, he wrote a kind of letter, describing actually how it should be done, not the way that they were doing it. And years later, they actually have apologized to Pradyumna and said, "You're probably right." But one of the main problems is this very, very when I was a member of it was only later, as I started to get mature, but then it was almost too late, because I don't want to really use this word, but I almost became too overqualified in my kind of, as a person, in ways of thinking. I developed kind of a freedom of thinking within this process. And for many people who were kind of I would call the word institutionalized, this was a kind of a threat to develop this kind of a free thinking attitude, because then you can think outside the box and think outside their box that they're trying to impose upon their kind of like their ring of power. And what happened was the kind of like the Krishna movement became kind of like okay, this apostasy of Prabhupada disciples leaving was kind of conveniently filled up with a new batch of devotees. I don't know if it'd be interesting if there was like statistics to show through the years from the time of Prabhupada the kind of the volume or the percentage or the population of the ISKCON kind of world, you see. But there was also this thing that had been happening over the years as ISKCON grew. This inside the ashram and outside it became the blur. It became the distance became different. You didn't have to be even during Prabhupada's time. You didn't have to live in an ashram to be part of the Krishna movement. And this whole, and then The problem with this institutionalized thing was that if you didn't agree with it, like people like me who just said, that's it, I've had enough, I'm going to do something else now, even if it was just a smaller step like many of us have done. We just gone, I've gone to England, gone to a house to live with devotees and work at a Krishna restaurant, but to change my whole thing. This was a business and they needed to pay people. To live in the world outside of that, I needed to have money to exist, you see. So, but I just want to get back to the kind of the basic idea about these inevitable kind of like flaws, really, in the system. That it's kind of and in one sense, what I think is that I don't think that Prabhupada really expected that format that he had created that worked in a certain period of time. And then, because when he saw it all getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the issues, then he started to kind of reassess his ideas about certain things because that's the nature of things. Things change with the time. They're not, there's many players in the whole game in the scheme of things. There's so many, and they're all affecting the story of the whole dynamic, this international organization, this movement. Impossible for one person to kind of keep on, especially at the age that Prabhupada had and his health. But he did mention in the end, in the last few months and stuff, he was kept going on about this idea of Varna Ashrama, and that's very, very controversial. This idea, I think, his basic. I think what he noticed was this: Krishna consciousness in its esoteric center, the whole idea of becoming Krishna conscious and developing prem, love of God, is a very, very, very highfalutin level of spirituality that is at the center of Gaudiya Vaishnavism and the whole purpose of Krishna consciousness. But and Prabhupada had wanted the devotees, somehow or other, he wanted simultaneously devotees to develop their Krishna consciousness as well as expand this organization, which involving so many, many things and objects and properties and people and complex matrices, And sometimes in that, he noticed that not everybody was maybe as pure as he thought that they were at the beginning. At the beginning, it was. I mean, there's this video being doing the rounds where was it the Suskin show when the devotees are all there and they're yellow and it's very early. I think it's 1970 in America. It is quite astounding when you watch it. The devotees are so innocent and so pure and dynamic, and that feeling of the group energy was, and we had that in Amsterdam in the early days as well. I mean, that's some of those that feeling of this family, this innocence, this purity, but then to keep that all together was very, very difficult, and so all these other things came into the picture, and anartas, people's anartas, the different kind of mentalities that people have brought with them that started to develop when they got into kind of positions of power within the Krishna movement, and also the whole idea that I think that you see Prabhupada's idea of Daivi Varnashram Dharma has got nothing, as far as I've understood it, with the Manu Samhita and strict, caste ideas about Varna and Ashrama. It's a whole different kind of vision altogether. It's based on what Prabhupada called Ishavasham, very simple and summed up in this phrase: simple living and high thinking. If you have simple living, high thinking, God-centered, those are the essence of the kind of social picture that Prabhupada wanted how devotees to live. And many of the ideas that Prabhupada had about, farms and living simply, that was part of the whole thing. Going back to he could foresee the breakdown of materialistic culture and the necessity. But what happened was, instead of doing that, because of the nature of the hierarchy, these certain individuals and positions of power the whole emphasis of the movement became about them and satisfying their needs. There was not really much of this kind of they never, people talked about istagoses and devotees sitting around and chatting. I mean, I can't remember even in Broad-minded Amsterdam hardly having any istagoses. I never felt there was this a collective where the elders, the wisdom, the collective wisdom of the elders in the community was not being really tapped into in the Krishna movement. In fact, they didn't really want that. They actually didn't want people with their own ideas and collective wisdom. They wanted their specific wisdom. They didn't want your wisdom getting in the way of their wisdom. And so they got trapped in a kind of hierarchy with kind of lots of yes men, a guy up here, somebody down here, rather than a collegial, a way of a kind of where the all of the Prabhupada disciples who had gone through this journey over years and years, hopefully developing some kind of spiritual insight, some kind of wisdom about the nature of things from studying the Vaishnava philosophy. Maybe they've got something that they can add to the story. Why don't we kind of sit and no, it was them deciding in their head, this is the way it's going to be, you're going to kind of submit to it. And so that was one of the inevitable flaws that was bound to happen. And I think it has changed. But it's taken many, that specific level of that dynamic of the zonal acharyas at least has changed. But I don't know about the other thing. But that's a very specific vision that we're talking about at this period. Well, I'm commentating of where really the Krishna movement got in about 1980, and that's 40 years ago. So, to really talk about the Krishna movement now in 2020 needs a lot more discussion and stuff, because it's become, there's a couple of more generations have come in this period of time. Things have moved on into all sorts of directions. But one of the things that Surabi told me, Surabi Swami, who was the person who designed all the temples, was, and also if you see the talks of Badraj, the artist devotee, talking about his relationship with Prabhupada, you can see it was very, very unique. Being an artist and having a relationship with Prabhupada was very different than a manager. And also, if you were kind of the type of, like Shamasundar, if you read of his books, the type of person he was, a different kind of Prabhupada comes out of in the story when you hear the interaction with the different devotees. So Surabi had a different relationship with Prabhupada than many other devotees. And Prabhupada told him that it was actually, he said, actually our movement won't be spread through the philosophy even. He said it will actually spread through culture. It will be the culture that will actually help spread the Krishna movement. And I suppose for me, and because I had these discussions with Surabi, because I basically, before he even told me that, that's what I felt, really, that after discovering and going on this journey, loving the Krishna philosophy, Hare Krishna, and I've got this experience from chanting and the devotees and the mantra, and then, oh wow, this music. Oh yeah, there's this food, the culture, there's this art, there's this temple designs, and this background, and then the poetry, and when you go deeply into the tradition of the Bhakti culture, you'll see that it is incredible. Some of the most fabulous things in Indian traditions, and all of those areas have come from various different Bhakti traditions, or the whole idea of devotion and kind of like connecting it with the divine. And so that's kind of Prabhupada's idea with kind of, and there's different stages of bhakti, and the kind of, you could say the lower stage of bhakti is karma yoga. It is a form of bhakti, and that's what in the discussion with Ramananda Roy and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the discussion kind of starts on a kind of Varnashram level, where Ramananda Roy says that that the purpose of life is, from the Gita, is to kind of work and offer one's fruits to God. That's kind of karma yoga, and that's meant to be in the idea of Daivi Varnashram society, a kind of a structured society where people work according to their guna and their karma, and they're working with a God-centered orientation and offering the fruits of their labor to God. And that was really kind of, you could say, kind of the idea behind ancient Indian culture, really. It was structured that way. You had the Brahmins, the intellectuals, then you had the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas and the workers. The only thing is that when it all goes wrong is, and you know, there's multiple stories in the Puranas, even of kings and Maharajas, the people in power, when they're not qualified and they don't act in a benign way, that's when it can all go really drastically wrong. When the people at the top are really, really wonky, and that's what we kind of, you know, it's not nothing's really changed, has it? I mean, it's been going like that in the world. I just wanted to just look at my notes. Sorry, I took a few notes today. Um, yes, yeah. Another a problem that I've seen inherent with with the organisation, and this thing that I've mentioned with is this point I made to Bhagavan. It was about, you know, trying to fit all these different people who are coming for Krishna consciousness, and then try to fit them into one kind of social package of operational. This is what we do in the Krishna movement. You know, we go out on Sankirtan and we sell books, and we go out in vans and we do, you know, you know, that was one of my problems that I had with where the kind of organisation was, where it was lacking. And the more I've gone on in life, on my journey, um, I've got more and more to the belief, really, I suppose, that yes, that spirituality has to have, that there is not one size fits all. You know, when you say, when you when you think of one size fits all, you just think of this kind of really boring kind of like t-shirt thing that's designed to be not to, you know, that anybody can kind of put it on and it can look different according to your size, you know, and it's meant to work for everybody, and it's a kind of it's a simple way. But then really when you get down to it, really what, you know, looks good and works well is if you go to a tailor, you know, and you get all of your clothes exactly tailor made to fit you, because that's how you are. You've got to, you know, you want to actually select the kind of fabrics, how you look, how it's tailored. That's what the meaning of bespoke is. So I like that term because I suppose I've, in everything that I'm interested in, I have very, you know, particular tastes that are very kind of like idiosyncratic to me, and you know, I've got friends and who I share all sorts of similarities with, but we, you know, but then, you know, we're all very, very, very different in every way, and you can see that's one of the problems I think with a religion in general, and the problems that prophets and avatars have when they're creating religions and setting up in, you know, with the idea of having these a mass movement, is trying to figure out. So what that happens is that you can find the universal things, and that's what Prabhupada, simple living, high thinking, chanting Hare Krishna and Prasadam. Phew, that's the kind of the basis of it, and then you can go up Hari Kata, you know, and all of these different things of Vaishnavism. But when it comes, you know, but when you're, you know, to try and fit everybody into one specific pattern to fit into that, it, you know, everyone's got to kind of like find their, everyone's got to find out who they are. And as far as I understood, that the Bhagavad Gita and is a spiritual treatise about how to know yourself and God. It's about getting wisdom and clarity and spiritual insight. And so I just think that if people had if you look at the teachings of Bhagavad Gita right at the beginning, it's a kind of, Arjuna is facing a quandary where he doesn't want to do, he can't, what he's facing is so extremely overwhelming that he wants to go away from it because he can't handle it. It's too much for him. But Krishna explains to him that his nature is that you are actually a warrior, and he reminds him of his past, what he's done. It's a kind of a temporary thing where he's just kind of gone a bit shaky. He's lost the plot, you know. But he thinks his solution is to try and do an activity that's not actually kind of natural for him. You know, it's not natural for him to leave a battlefield and not engage against adharma and adversaries. His dharma is to do that. That's just who he is, and that's basically what happens in those early chapters of Bhagavad Gita, is where Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna that it's much better. It's the whole idea is to discover who you are, what your guna and karma is, and act according to that. You see, and that is how that's kind of what the Varnashram idea is: a society where people live together and cooperate, because everyone, you know, is different, but different people fall into different kind of different categories according to their guna and their karma. Just like in Ayurveda, we have a kapha, pita, and vayu. Um, Kapha, pita, kapha, pita, and vata. Sorry, excuse me. And just like the different bodily types, they almost create different personality types, different kind of like traits. And you know, and like I said, you know, Ayurvedic doctors and even astrologers and people, they can see by lakshanas on your body who you are. You know, we've come into this world, we've taken on, we've taken birth into a certain family, we've inherited genetic structures from both lines of our family going back for eons, and our karmic packages from our previous lifetime, and we bring that with us into this lifetime, and we've got these inherent qualities and natures that we have with us, and we're obviously going to have a better time in life and become more successful if we are more attuned to who we are, really. And that's what it's kind of quite simple. That's what and I think that that takes a little bit of discernment on the part of leaders or people who are trying to kind of like organize people in society, just to take those kind of principles into consideration. Uh, because you know, it's kind of obvious that that is the best way to kind of run society, where people are happy and doing what it is that they want to do. It just all makes sense to me, and the process of education, and it should be a process of nourishing people to the point where they go through that process of discovery, and it's nurtured, and then in society it's sustained, and then the purpose of the society then is to help everybody in their own individual journeys to achieve, you know, the ultimate goal of life. Because then you get back to all the big philosophy. You know, why are we here? What are we in the world? Why did we come here? What is it? We're only here in one lifetime for so many years, and we don't, you know, even that's not certain. So what are we going to, you know, what can you achieve in this lifetime, basically? And what is this bespoke spirituality that I'm talking about? It can become quite acute, because the um, um, the foundation of this specific lineage that I've been connected to, the Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, has actually at its center, you know, there's okay, Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it is said in the Vaishnava literature, is an avatar of Radha and Krishna, and he came to achieve two purposes in this incarnation. One was to distribute the Yuga Dharma, which is the Harinam, which is mentioned in Shastras. Harinama, 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 Eva Kevalam. Kalo Nyasteva, 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 Gatiranyataha. I think it's from the Brihad Naradiya Purana. It's repeated 3 times in this Kali Yuga. The way is to chant the names of God. And so Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that's he started the Song Kirtan, which means Kirtan means to chant, and Sangha means together, congregational chanting. Of that was his exoteric role, and the esoteric role he came as in the form of Radha, golden outside, and he's Krishna. He wanted to take the position, a role of Radha to understand himself. It's very esoteric. It's something very specific that only really Gaudiya Vaishnavas can appreciate or have a feeling for, because there's all the different Vaishnava lineages that worship Radha and Krishna, but this specific aspect of what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's nature and his role. This is very specific for the Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage. And when one gets deeply um, um, involved, because this is what's actually one of the things that's actually happened as the lineage went from spread out from Bengal via Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to Prabhupada. Um, when things start to expand away from this, you could say the original source of time and space, there's these there's these two major forces kind of working. There's the force which is driving things forward in time from their cultural roots, spiritual, cultural roots. Let's put it this way, because the spirituality is contained within a culture. And then there's the force which is where it's come from, where that tradition has come from, that which is involved with conserving the force which is conserving what has been, and there's the energy which moves forward. And it just so happens that our lineage that I'm connected to via Bhakti Prabhupada is the lineage that expanded. It was the lineage from Chaitanya that had the special mission to do this, go out and go out. Now, what happened is that these esoteric roots involving these highest levels of the bhakti, which is the goal of what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to give, is prema. This is all what is described in the bhakti literatures written by the Goswamis. Those literatures and the processes for obtaining that are something which is impossible to teach and implement in an institutional framework. So what happens is that the institution has to emphasize or be predominated by the kind of the Vaidhi Bhakti, which is a process of bhakti which is regulated, and it is a kind of it's the level of bhakti which is meant to lead on to rag bhakti, raganuga bhakti, where these high levels of bhakti are there. So how does this happen? How does an institution which is set up to provide a framework for practicing Vaidhi Bhakti, how do the people involved with that, how are they going to obtain or this essence, this mystical spiritual essence, which is the goal of what the tradition is for? And that's become quite a bit of a problem, because even at the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, now, according to Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and other social commentators, the kind of whole kind of bhakti tradition, as it been spreading through especially the 18th century, 17th and 18th century, they would say that all sorts of kind of deviant kind of influences had come and mixed and mingled with the original teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And there's a term that was created to delineate these different kind of branches that are not so pure, and that's called upper sampradayas. And there's so many of them in Bengal, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as you can imagine, as his influence spread all over Bengal, there's all different kinds of social strata, historical things that have been happening from centuries, different kinds of parts of Bengal, all sorts of influences merging into the picture, worship of the goddess, Buddhist tantric Buddhism from centuries before. All these things with threads were going on in Bengal, and so that and not only that, even amongst the strict Gaudiya Vaishnavas, or whatever that means, is that there have been disagreements. There's a whole controversial school of Gaudiya Vaishnavism based in Katwa, not Katwa, from Srihata, Narahari Shaka is at, and I just posted a picture yesterday of a picture of Sachi Dulal Babaji with Gadadhar Pran, and quite a few people have asked me, and they want to know more about. They've heard about Sachi Dulal Babaji, or they want to, people do want to understand what this Gaura Nagari is, because it's part of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. But there's certain aspects of the tradition which are so kind of, you know, that people even at the early stages of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there were different schools of thought, And after Mahaprabhu, there was Nityananda. He was the predominant. And then after that, it was the teachings of the Goswamis that came with Narottam Srinivas and Shamananda. And then that developed all over in different parts of Bengal. And and then somehow this came down, and then according to that Victorian period at the turn of the century, um, many of these kind of deviant, according to them, have become mixed in with the original pure teachings. You see, now some of the people that are involved with those traditional teachings, they have their accusations about our lineage coming from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. They say that some of the things, innovations that Bhaktisiddhanta introduced into the lineage are not authorized by traditional Gaudiya Vaishnava culture. And then when I was doing my research into the kirtan, as I've explained into my last share, I was doing lots of research. I wasn't really looking at literature and the philosophy. I was looking at the musical styles, and I kind of overlooked what was at the kernel. But literally within lots of this kirtan, this music tradition, was a kernel of esoteric bhakti that actually within the Gaudiya Mutt institution was taboo. So none of the styles of kirtan that I was researching existed in the Gaudiya Mutt, and many of the poems and the poetry that is used, written by Narottam and so on, is censored, and they've given you kind of like safe stuff that's not too esoteric. And so what happens what's happened socially as a result of that is that the Gaudiya Mutt has expanded wonderfully. It's got these centers. Created a great format for Vaidhi Bhakti and training. And many people, young students and people, go through that training, and you go and you get all the training and all the rudiments of bhakti. And then in that journey, after maybe 10, 20, 30 years, or who knows how long it will take you in that journey, till you start becoming inquisitive about all this other stuff that you can't find there because it's been censored by the institution. So this is actually what's actually happened. And so what's happened historically is that, this is just not my theorizing, is that if you go to Radhakund or Navadvip, most of the people who are Babajis and following esoteric or attempting to follow esoteric Vaishnavism, they may have received, or quite a lot of them have received their training in the Gaudiya Mutt. But it didn't satisfy their yearnings because there's certain taboos about what raga, the process of following raga bhakti. So this is going to be something that's going to haunt our lineage as it progresses in time and space, because as people go through the process of bhakti and take it on, there's going to be a time in their if they're strong adepts and been following Vaidhi Bhakti for years and years and years. Okay, just say you want to learn sitar from Ravi Shankar. He's not present, but it's just this. It's not just the concept. You've heard him play, and you heard him do this incredible thing. He's playing this incredible music, and you want to sound like him. But when you go to actually have the lesson, he says that you actually have to sit like this, do this, play this thing, learn the sari gama, so stuff that's not esoteric at all. It's all technical. It's stuff that you have to learn, and you have to do, and you have to go through years and years and years of this thing and that thing and that thing, and learning different ragas and different patterns and things. And then what you do is, once you've learned that, in the most art forms, once you've learned the technique is not the goal, it's just the means to get to somewhere. Okay, it's to produce art. It's to play a raga, which is kind of a life form. But you can only do that when you're mature. And to be mature, you have to have traversed a certain kind of path where your whole senses and sensibilities have become saturated in the world of aesthetics, spiritual aesthetics, and musical aesthetics. And only then can you sit down, and then your guru will say, "You're ready to play. You can play rag now. You can play the raga." And that's when when you hear all the different greats, how different they are. They'll play a same raga, but they'll and even on different days they'll play it because of the mood. So it's in a similar way. In a similar way, to kind of want to kind of like suddenly play a raga. You can't. You have to go through this process, and so there is these systems, you know. But then there comes this quandary, and that person who I just was talking about earlier, Gadadhar Pran, who was an ex-member of ISKCON, he became quite influential because he left ISKCON, and along with Hiranyagarbha and Madhusudan, they became initiated by Lalit Prasad, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's brother, because of this controversy about dikshas, lineages, processes of following bhakti. There was a disagreement between Lalit Prasad and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati over Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Diksha Guru, Bipan Bihari Goswami, and what their role was in the whole scheme of things. And you could say Lalit Prasad represented the more traditional conservative path, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, it was, you know, compared to many of the tradition, he was very radical. He was introducing all sorts of radical things and spreading it out. But see, then both parts of the story, if the traditional conservatives, the people who are involved with conserving the tradition, become too rigid and not flexible with time to move with time, they will kind of, you know, ossify, philosophy, become like fossils, and it will just destroy, it will just disappear because it's not adaptable. You know, it hasn't taken on nuances of the time, and if the progressive part of a tradition that's moving forward gets so kind of far away from its roots, from the root tradition, and loses that, then it can become kind of so kind of thinned out and diluted that it loses its original purpose. You see, so it's interesting because it's come like, you know, after like, well, 50 years at the beginning of ISKCON, and you know how many our senior Krishna devotees who have been following the path of bhakti in various levels of intensity for so many different years. These are the questions that are coming up, and Gadadhar Pran wrote this book, a little pamphlet, and I have to say it was very interesting. It was, why did Lord Chaitanya come, and what did he come to give? And that's a very good question, you know, in the scheme of things. And when he wrote that book, it appeared at the time in kind of the general Krishna devotee's journey of 30, 40 years into it. It was like, yeah, what did he come to give? What was it all about? I've been involved in this Krishna movement, doing this and doing that and doing this and getting involved with that person and this thing and this movement. But what was it all about again, you know? So in that book, he actually kind of reminds that the esoteric kernel of it is to achieve these esoteric states of Krishna consciousness. How that is actually going to be achieved, he has his idea about it, and there are lots of different people who have their ideas about it. I'm still very, very interested in all the different ideas. I'm still personally yet to be 100 convinced about any of the people that I've met who have taken up the path or said they've taken up the path of Rag Bhakti, if they've actually kind of got it, whatever it is, you know. There's still many, many questions up for me about this story, but I thought I would just kind of like address some of these things today, because these are some of the things that I've noticed, and the kind of as the Krishna movement has is expanded, and it's still expanding. Things and issues are going to different times are going to take on different kinds of relevance. And one of the things that has happened due to the fact of this kind of the apostasy from ISKCON, and this you know, of this transformation of people coming into this organization, getting trained, leaving it, more people coming in. This is kind of really been going on. But what's happened is that they've because of this process has been happening. They've lost a lot of maturity in the process. In other words, what's happened is you're left with a very thin core of devotees who've gone through this process for a long period of time, and you're left with a small core who are not really truly representative of the whole generation of Krishna devotees that got trained by Prabhupada. What's happening is many people that have left the organization, the institution, have actually just kind of gone in onto wider stories, and I personally think that is obviously some kind of part of the picture. There is something in the divine plan that, and also what that I think that Prabhupada knew that that's actually what actually was going to happen. The institution and the way it was set up when he was there with all the different ideas, it's there. You figure it out. You work with it. This is what's going to happen. All the seeds of the idea. It's really going to be um, how people come together over time in the Krishna big picture where people kind of add and contribute to the picture about how it actually is going to develop. The thing is, it has got a life of its own, and it's definitely not what it was when I left the Krishna movement. When I left that Krishna movement in 1980 in the spring, and I was sitting with that group of devotees in Finchley, um, I was considered what was called a term that I'm a fringy. I was one of the early fringes in England. In other words, a fringy was somebody that kind of like wasn't very strict and didn't follow the four principles anymore, and dabbling with Maya. And that's what the people inside the institution thought of fringes. But actually, what was going on was that that may have been true, some of those things. But actually, what was happening was everybody who was leaving was going through a process of individuation in various ways, because that's where the real test of all of this training that we've had in these institutions and this philosophy over years and years, this is where it's going to kind of like come into play in terms of who we are as persons, how we relate to the world and people, the effect that we have on the community around us, and ourselves. You know, huge. I'm in the minority of men that have stayed single. I don't know about the women, and most probably few of them. I think nearly the majority of all people are most probably of my age and older, of grandparents by now. And so they've gone through their story, which has involved when they moved, especially out of the ISKCON. It's been, getting a job, having, I've been talking to some of my old friends, Matanga, he left Europe and he came back to America. And it's an amazing story. He told me the other day how he ended up through some old friends that he knew before he joined the Christian temple getting a job. And he's had that job for years. Not everybody has had such a stable time in their journey outside of the kind of the Krishna movement. But the Krishna movement itself hadn't had a very stable time either. My goodness, it's gone through a lot. But I think I'm going to stop there now because I've kind of I've run out of things to say for the moment, and I'll most probably come on tomorrow. Like I said before, if I'm interested for different people who've been following me and following the story or are interested in things for me to talk about, questions, and because I want to have some more things to talk about, and I'm sure I will come up with some more things. But I'm going to thank you all again for joining me today and hearing my thoughts on things. I'm sure there's lots of things I've not covered and things that I'm going to carry on talking about. Um, and wherever you are, whatever you're doing, just kind of stay in your spiritual autonomy. I use that word. I like this word from Jung, individuation. It's about, try to enjoy being yourself, whatever it is that you are, and enjoy doing what it is that you do, and appreciate yourself for what you are. And then maybe that will help in one's appreciation for others and the world as well. And okay, that's my thought for the day. Lots of love to everybody. Big hugs. Take care, and I'll let you all know when I'm giving my next share. Could very well be tomorrow. Bye.